If you have, you know that boys play with dolls. Now, they may play with dolls the regular way, the way we're used to girls playing with dolls, or they may weaponize dolls, because boys will do that. They'll turn them into spears or rapid fire machine guns, but technically speaking, they're playing with dolls. Or at least that's what my sons did. And when one of my sons was 3 years old, he asked for a doll for Christmas. Now, this set up a dilemma in my family because I was okay with it. But my husband, although he thought he was a very modern and forward-thinking kind of parent, just could not see himself telling his friends, I bought my son a doll for Christmas. And my dad, he's a crusty old Marine, and my dad he made his thing completely known. Do not buy that boy a doll. Now, my dad and my husband had learned this lesson. And that lesson is that boys don't play with dolls. But who do you think taught them that lesson? The media. Now, anybody who knows me knows that I hate that term. I hate hearing people say the media. And I hate that because it suggests that there's one organization and that we say the same thing all the time. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to talking about minorities or gender groups or roles and activities, we being the media, tend to distribute the same monolithic images over and over again. I mean, think about it. You learn that boys don't play with dolls every time you see an advertisement for a doll that does not feature a boy playing with it. And what about storylines in television shows and movies? Do you see boys playing with dolls in those? What's the last one you saw? Because the one that comes to my mind is the Brady Bunch. You know, that episode where Bobby was accused of stealing Cindy's kitty carry-all doll. We remember that? Do you remember how angry Bobby got when it was suggested that he had touched that doll? Here's the scary part. That show is still in syndication, and it's still teaching the lesson that boys don't play with dolls. Consider this. American infants spend about 2 hours a day, 70% of them, 2 hours a day in front of a media screen. And American adults spend twice that amount of time. They're getting content from us. And let's talk about that content, because what's happening is the mass media is delivering images, and those images are coming with stereotypical representations, and we're delivering that through our social media and through our broadcast programming and through our books and through our magazines and through our blogs and through our commercial messages. Stereotypes. And then we're feeding society all of this information about what's normal, what's appropriate, what's acceptable. The mass media is teaching our publics about who should be embraced and who should be ostracized, who should be feared and who should be celebrated. And it's all in how we frame the content. Think about the messages that we send. Let's consider how we handled AIDS in Africa. How we dealt with AIDS in the media. Because when AIDS first was discovered, we were afraid. And when we're afraid, we tend to want to contain something and get it away from us. And that's what happened. Our news media started to tell us that this was a homosexual problem. Homosexual males were the ones who had most of the disease, were dealing with the disease the most. So that's where our stories were centralized. We told story after story after story about homosexual males. This became a lifestyle issue. That is, until AIDS began to spread to a broader demographic. And when that happened, the media had to change its focus. Now, this was about the time that chimpanzees in West Africa, go with me, chimpanzees in West Africa were having a link to the AIDS virus. So we looked at the continent with its 55 countries and associated that with those West African chimpanzees. Our news stories started to centralize on Africa. Our popular media started to centralize on Africa, and all of a sudden AIDS became an African thing. It's still an African thing. This is what we're doing. We are categorizing people and categorizing information in ways that sets up the way people think about it. All of that happening with AIDS, it's then no wonder that in 2013, as she was getting on a plane from London to South Africa, Justine Sacco thought it was okay to send out a tweet that said, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." That joke only works if she in some way believes that only black Africans are susceptible to the disease. Justine had learned the media's lessons well. Here's the thing. As media professionals, we have a social function that we serve in society. And that social function requires us to be representative in our storytelling and to make sure that we are also being inclusive in our storytelling. We have to make sure that we're not othering people. Now, when I say othering people, that means we're setting up people to be exotic or different or strange. That's not representation. To give you an example, the news media others people when we say, let's go and cover this international group or this ethnic festival, and we treat it like it's Halloween, complete with costumes, theme music, and even novelty foods. That's othering people. That's not true representation. And surely these people have more to offer society than a snapshot of their culture. I mean, they live here too. They live amongst us too. Surely they have more to offer. This is where you come in. Because when you see the mass media delivering monolithic messages and stereotypical messages about who gets to do what and what's acceptable, you have to speak up. You have to hold us accountable for getting those stories right and not presenting something as the truth when in actuality it is a truth. So how do you do that? Well, maybe you tweet, or maybe you blog, or maybe you become a citizen journalist and you give us more information, or you start your own film program and you tell the story a different way. But you have to hold us accountable. That's what happened to Justine Sacco. When she sent that tweet out, it was to a small group of followers, but it quickly became the #1 trending topic on Twitter under the hashtag #HasJustineLandedYet? People were angry, and they let Justine know it, and they let Justine's employers know it. And 14 hours later, when she landed in South Africa, Justine no longer had a job. She's a PR professional. She should have known better. Justine learned a different lesson that day. This also happened during 2014 and 2015 in the protests that happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland. Our news media was there, and our news media was saying the protesters are looting without any qualification. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, people on the ground said not all protesters are looting. And so they became citizen journalists, and they started calling the networks and calling the newspapers and saying, you're getting this wrong. When they did that, we saw the news media change its framing of the stories, and they started to tell us about protesters who were actually protecting businesses, not looting them. And they also told us about parents who saw their children protesting but then ran down in the streets when they saw their children about to become looters and snatched them off of the street. We only saw those stories in the mainstream media because people like you stood up and said no. So you have to hold us accountable. And your job is to tell us, hey, you're telling our stories. I need you to get it right. When you tell us that, we change things. If you don't, you're going to continue to get the same images over and over and over. Now, I have to leave, but I cannot leave without finishing the story about that doll. Because we bought my son a doll that Christmas. His name was Henry. He was a Cabbage Patch doll, a gymnast, and for about a year, he was my son's favorite playmate. Henry and my son did everything together. They dug holes in the backyard, because that's what they did. And then they went fishing with Papa, and they made biscuits with Granny. And they watched Space Jam every single day. Henry was one of the Buck Boys. And you know what? He taught us something about boys and dolls and masculinity. He taught us that lesson so well that the next year, when my other son put in his Christmas request, we didn't even bat an eye. You know what he wanted? A kitchen. He got it. Media matter. We're telling your stories. Make us tell many truths and not the truth. Hold us accountable. Thank you. Thank you.